She had just given birth to a baby girl, but before she could even catch a clear glimpse of the child's face, a servant beside her cruelly took the infant away. Time flew by, and 7 years passed in the blink of an eye. Elizabeth's yearning was like 1,000 threads of emotion tangled in her heart. On each of her daughter's birthdays, she would carefully write about her deep maternal love in her diary. Desperate to find her daughter, she disguised herself as a governess and embarked on a long journey to seek her family. Fortunately, fate finally smiled upon her. She accidentally arrived at the manor where her daughter lived. From the servants, she learned that her daughter had an extremely stubborn personality. In the girl's eyes, it seemed no one else was tolerated except her father, for governesses had already been driven away by her cold demeanor. She always stayed alone in the pavilion on the lake, refusing to communicate with anyone, although they had never met. In the depths of Elizabeth's heart, an indescribable bond of blood firmly told her that this was her daughter. However, the cruel fateful contract was like a shackle, tightly imprisoning the passion and yearning within her. It turned out that years ago, to repay her father's heavy debts, Elizabeth had been forced to make a deal with fate that seemed rational but was actually born of despair. A magnate offered what seemed like a reasonable condition: if she successfully bore his child, she would receive £500, yet the terms hidden in this contract were destined to keep them apart forever, like two souls toyed with by fate. But what she hadn't expected was that this man was nothing like the wealthy playboy she had imagined. He exuded an indescribable noble aura, like the calm before a storm, elegant and composed. That gentle yet mysterious aura was like an unfinished tragic poem, unable to suppress the deep sadness within. Despite this, the ingrained fear and helplessness still clung to her like a shadow. Her only hope was that this nightmare would end soon, allowing her to reclaim the free self she once was and break free from that seemingly elegant yet cruel shackle. On the first night, the atmosphere between them was almost suffocating. Awkward beyond words, Elizabeth clung tightly to two pieces of clothing as if they were her only support. Charles maintained his elegant, gentlemanly demeanor, respecting her to the utmost, yet inner guilt kept Charles from sleeping. Until the next day, he finally mustered the courage to confide in Elizabeth. As the heir to an aristocratic family, he bore the responsibility of continuing the family's glory, but his wife had become a vegetable in an accident years ago. This forced him to make this seemingly helpless decision. For Elizabeth, this was not just about carrying on the family line but also about repaying her father's debts. She had little choice, but this sincere conversation quietly dissolved the barrier in Elizabeth's heart. Even for a moment, she found herself deeply attracted to Charles's demeanor, and an indescribable emotion quietly welled up in Charles's heart. But he was acutely aware of his responsibility to his wife, constantly reminding himself to stay rational. The atmosphere on the second night was much more relaxed. Elizabeth still kept those two pieces of clothing, but her mood was no longer as tense as the previous night. At dawn, the seaside scenery was so peaceful that it made one forget the passage of time. Elizabeth stood alone on the beach, savoring this rare moment of tranquility. Charles approached her silently and stood beside her in silence. The emotions between them were complex and unspeakable, their connection subtly dangerous through occasional eye contact. Elizabeth poured out all her troubles and helplessness to him. In that instant, they were like a couple deeply in love, their feelings profound yet forced to maintain a proper distance. On the third night, the relationship between Elizabeth and Charles grew even closer, and her heart seemed ignited by blazing love. Yet brief joy is always fleeting. After just 3 days together, they had to part. Despite the overwhelming reluctance and pain, Charles unhesitatingly set off on the return journey, leaving Elizabeth alone to face the long months of pregnancy. Now that she had finally found her daughter, the constraints of the contract kept her from speaking out. She couldn't reveal the truth of her daughter's birth, forced to silently endure the girl's cold gaze and the growing distance between them. That day, as usual, the daughter ran to the wall at dawn. When Charles got out of the car, he immediately crouched down, skillfully letting her step onto his shoulders. Seeing this scene, a warmth welled up in Elizabeth's heart, but she also felt a faint unease. She knew that Charles's doting on their daughter had made her increasingly willful and proud, fearing that this routine would sooner or later lead to trouble. When Elizabeth approached Charles softly, his face immediately turned serious at the sight of her, a flash of panic in his eyes. His heart tensed, worried that Elizabeth's presence would uncover their secret. Despite Elizabeth's repeated assurances that she would cause no trouble, Charles coldly refused her. Then he ordered the butler to fire Elizabeth immediately, not allowing her to stay any longer. However, the butler told Charles that according to their signed contract, they had to give a month's notice even to terminate the employment. Helpless, Charles had to temporarily compromise. He then took Elizabeth into his wife's bedroom. He had always hidden nothing from his wife. No matter what happened, he would tell her everything without reservation. Thus, he begged Elizabeth to swear in front of his wife that she would never reveal any secrets between them. When Elizabeth truly began educating Louisa, she was astonished to find that her daughter's arrogance far exceeded her imagination. Louisa not only disrespected the governess but also frequently provoked Elizabeth with biting words. Every time Elizabeth tried to communicate with Louisa, the girl would act icy cold, even speaking harsh words. This left Elizabeth both embarrassed and angry. Filled with helplessness and confusion, she had always hoped to change her daughter's temper, but the reality was more complicated than she had expected. She knew that if she continued to indulge Louisa, her personality would only worsen, possibly leading her down a path of no return. So Elizabeth made a decision. She locked Louisa in her room. No matter how the girl cried or pleaded, Elizabeth was determined to ignore her until she truly realized her mistake. The crying from the room finally caught Charles's attention. He stormed upstairs in anger, demanding that Elizabeth open the door immediately. As a father who doted on his daughter, Charles only wanted Louisa to be happy. He had never cared much about whether she was polite or well-mannered. Facing Charles's interrogation, Elizabeth patiently responded. She told him that she was doing this for Louisa's future. Elizabeth's words were like a spring rain, subtly touching Charles's heartstrings. He finally understood how deep and selfless Elizabeth's love and care for Louisa were. In that moment, Charles chose to let go of his doubts and trust Elizabeth unreservedly. However, Louisa, having lost her father's protection, felt her mood sink. Angrily, she threw her lunch at the door, as if to express her dissatisfaction and defiance. But Elizabeth was undeterred, still focused on making cards, completely unaffected by her daughter's bad mood. Seeing her mother so calm, Louisa's anger flared even more, and she used bitter words to attack Elizabeth. But Elizabeth ignored her, continuing her work. As time passed, the charm of the cards gradually attracted Louisa's attention. She began to take interest in these simple cards. Under Elizabeth's patient guidance, Louisa gradually learned how to rearrange and combine them. As her mood relaxed, her inner anxiety began to fade. She became increasingly calm. Seeing her daughter's progress, Elizabeth felt a surge of pride and relief, so she decided to grant her daughter a wish, only to find that Louisa's wish was surprisingly simple. She just wanted to leave that oppressive room. Charles stayed up all night outside the door, his heart full of love and concern for Louisa, and it was this excessive doting that gave Louisa an endless stream of confidence. Yet she never worried about facing any punishment. Whenever night fell and Louisa fell asleep soundly, Elizabeth would gently enter her room and leave a warm goodnight kiss on her forehead. Although Elizabeth educated her daughter in the strictest way, she hid that silent maternal love deep in her heart, silently guarding every moment of Louisa's life. The next day, Louisa clung tightly to Charles's hand, unwilling to let her father leave her side. But Charles couldn't stay at home for long due to work, which made the hidden unease in Louisa's heart gradually turn into anxiety. She increasingly felt that only with her father by her side could she feel truly safe and content. In that moment, Elizabeth released all her pent-up anger and inner frustration, unhesitatingly grabbing the paint bottle on the table and violently splashing the paint across Louisa's face. Then she quickly grabbed another bottle of paint and poured it onto her own face without hesitation. In an instant, Louisa felt a maternal love she had never experienced before. That warm feeling was like a spring breeze, stirring a gentle current of warmth in her heart. From that moment on, she no longer acted willfully or impulsively like before but learned to listen to and respect Elizabeth's opinions. She gradually opened up to Elizabeth, confiding the thoughts that had weighed on her for years. She told Elizabeth that the woman lying in the hospital bed was not her biological mother, and she had always regarded the pavilion in the lake as her true mother, because only in that peaceful and harmonious place could she find inner calm and a sense of security. She had used arrogance and willfulness to hide her inner loneliness, and as a mother, Elizabeth was filled with deep guilt. Charles had been silently observing his daughter's changes. To express his gratitude to Elizabeth, he decided to invite her to a sumptuous dinner, specially inviting his landlord friend to join them. However, it wasn't long before Charles's friend developed a deep interest in Elizabeth. The next day, he didn't hesitate to confess his feelings to Elizabeth, but she firmly refused him. The friend felt both disappointed and confused, truly unable to understand why Elizabeth had rejected him. Charles stood by and smiled slightly, as if all of this had been expected. To make Elizabeth understand his true feelings, Charles took her into a dimly lit room. In that instant, Elizabeth's mind was pulled back 7 years, as if time had flowed back to their first encounter. At that time, Charles had said similar things, but the scene now was entirely different, because the hesitation and confusion in Charles's eyes were gone, replaced by deep determination. The next day, Charles enjoyed swimming in the lake, while Elizabeth stood quietly in the distance, watching him quietly. Her gaze involuntarily lingered on him, and an indescribable emotion welled up in her heart. She gently stroked her neck, as if she could feel the blazing fire of love spreading deep within her. She longed for his approach, longed for a response to this emotion. As night fell, Charles sat in the study early, perhaps eager to learn about his daughter's studies or longing for more opportunities to be close. He casually mentioned the 3 nights 7 years ago. Elizabeth remained silent, her heart already deeply attracted to the man before her. She felt every glance, every breath from him, which carried an irresistible depth and charm, as if the emotion between them had quietly taken root in their hearts. In that instant, 2 hearts beat rapidly in the warm atmosphere by the fireplace, their breaths intertwining into a tense and rapid melody. That night, they finally broke through all moral constraints, releasing the long-suppressed passion in their hearts together. As time passed, the relationship between Charles and Elizabeth quietly warmed, but they still felt confused, unsure how to face the contradiction between this relationship and reality. Finally, the bad news arrived. Daughter Louisa accidentally discovered their relationship and mistakenly believed her father was abandoning her. Overcome by anger and disappointment, she couldn't calm down. Disregarding the frozen lake, she risked walking on the fragile ice toward the pavilion. Seeing this, Elizabeth's heart panicked, and she hurriedly chased after her, anxiously calling Louisa's name. However, Louisa didn't look back. Suddenly, the ice cracked, and she fell into the icy lake. Elizabeth unhesitatingly struggled to break through the ice, although the biting cold made her almost unbearable, and the pain from her strained hands and feet nearly made her collapse. But the power of maternal love made her forget all the pain, and she swam with all her might toward her daughter. Finally, Elizabeth successfully rescued Louisa and brought her back to the warm house. After watching Louisa fall asleep safely, she gently covered her with a quilt and then went to the fireplace to add some firewood. The warm firelight illuminated the entire room, bringing a sense of incomparable comfort and warmth. Little did she know that Louisa wasn't asleep at all. Soon, a group of men in black broke into the manor. It was then that Charles learned that his father's uncontrolled spending had led to the manor being mortgaged to repay debts. Charles was now facing a major life choice. His wife had been in a coma for 10 years, and the manor had become a shackle he could never escape. Not only had his business suffered a heavy blow, but he also felt constant anxiety about his wife's safety. Over the years, he had taken care of his wife meticulously, but he had never truly considered whether she wanted to continue this bound life. Perhaps she was also silently enduring those inexpressible pains. Now the manor was about to be sold, and his wife could no longer bear the pain of moving again. All of this weighed heavily on Charles's heart like 1,000 pounds. He slowly walked to the fireplace and gently extinguished the last embers. Then he pushed open all the windows and doors, letting the cold wind blow into the house. He gently stroked the quilt on his wife's bed, as if holding a farewell ceremony for her. On that icy night, Charles knelt beside his wife's bed, and the confession and prayer in his heart intertwined, turning into the most profound pain, deeply rooted in his heart. The next day, the doctor announced that his wife had passed away quietly, and everyone silently accepted this heartless news. Even his wife's sister didn't utter any complaints. Charles held a solemn funeral for his wife. The entire manor was filled with an oppressive atmosphere, as if the air had lost its flow, leaving only endless silence. The day after the funeral, daughter Louisa quietly entered Elizabeth's room, and her gaze involuntarily fell on the thick diary on the table. The moment she opened the diary, she was astonished to find that almost every page detailed her life, as if her mother's soul had never left, still silently watching over her. In that instant, Louisa's heart suddenly became clear, and all the confusion seemed to find answers at that moment. So she found Elizabeth and softly called out to her. At this time, Elizabeth could no longer suppress the emotions in her heart, and she tightly hugged her daughter in her arms. All the hard work and tears turned into the sweetest reward at this moment. Louisa called out Mom over and over again, each call full of long-lost warmth, as if trying to make up for all the moms that had gone unsaid. The voice was as clear and affectionate as a melody from heaven, filling the heart with warmth and emotion. The ending of the story is filled with warmth and hope. The family of 3 finally left the manor and began a new life. The past sorrows and confusion seemed to fade away with their departure. Life is sometimes like an unfinished painting, seemingly fragmented but hiding endless possibilities. Perhaps we are all passers-by in the long river of fate, moving forward with our own scars and regrets, but as long as there is a spark of hope in our hearts, and we hold on to the beliefs of kindness and perseverance, one day, the broken painting will be made whole again in the warmth of love, ushering in our own spring blossoms, because the true meaning of life is not whether we have experienced storms, but whether we always maintain a yearning for an expectation of beauty, just like the tears when this mother and daughter reunited. Though filled with the bitterness of the past, they also reflected the hope and light of the future. This may be the greatest redemption and gift that heaven bestows upon us. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.